if you want to go ahead and turn to Habakkuk, what we want to try to accomplish tonight is really we got all the way to verse 11 in chapter 1, but we want to finish up chapter 1 and really finish chapter 2. And so as we go into the second part of chapter 1, can anybody remind me, what is the context of Habakkuk? Does anybody remember? When I say context, like even before Habakkuk comes on the scene and he's bringing these complaints to God, does anybody recall like what is about to happen?
Judgment.
Osho. And do you remember where that judgment is supposedly coming from?
Babylon.
Right, Babylon. And who was the king at that time? This should connect with those who know VeggieTales well.
Nebuchadnezzar.
Right. King Nebi, as they say in VeggieTales. So just some context. This is before, okay, the Babylonian captivity, where Nebuchadnezzar shows up, basically takes over Jerusalem, takes over the kingdoms, and then takes a large portion of the people back to Babylon. And so another part of the context, if you fast forward in the story, would be like the book of Daniel. Okay, so we know what happens where, Daniel in the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego in the fiery furnace, all that stuff happened in Babylon. And so this is before that even happens. Does anybody recall, is he happy about what's about to happen?
No.
No, he is not. Why is he not happy?
Because he thought God was not being merciful. He thought that God was just letting bad things happen to them.
Okay. So in the midst of him crying out to God, remember, he's crying out about all the injustice and all the things that are going on in Jerusalem at the time, and all the bad things that he's having to watch and see. We can imagine maybe he is trying to reach out to the people and trying to tell them, hey, turn back to God, and yet obviously he's ignored. That he's not alone in that. And I remember last week I told you some of the context is reminding yourself that when you read Habakkuk, that it's not like just him singled out in the story of the Bible. And what I mean by that is, when Habakkuk is on the scene, guess what? Jeremiah is also on the scene. So I've said before, be careful to think that when you go to a book of the Bible, you automatically think chronologically in the way that you turn the pages of the Bible, and you're like, okay, so I'm in Jeremiah right now, so that means Jeremiah's alive and he's in Jerusalem. And then Jeremiah died, and then, oh, look, here comes the next prophet. Just realize that a lot of these prophets were on the scene at the same time. And God may be using them in different locations or in different ways. Nevertheless, we may get somewhat of an idea of who Habakkuk was, not just by the fact that he was obviously a prophet and God is communicating to him. But if you look at chapter 2, verse 1, which I said before in the context of this book, really chapter 2, verse 1 belongs in chapter 1 if you're trying to break it up into structure. But listen to what it says in chapter 2 of verse 1. It says, I will take my stand at my watch post and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me. And that may give you an idea of we don't know for sure if Habakkuk was actually, one of his jobs was actually to guard the city walls, or if he's just using that as poetic language. He's crying out to God about all the injustice in Jerusalem. And then we got to verse 5, and listen to what it says. And I think I asked this last week, I don't remember. How many of you have ever had God do something in your life that surprised you? Like you didn't see it coming? Anybody want to share a specific time that maybe you remember God did something, and you didn't see it coming.
Well, I was gonna say the coronavirus as a
Yeah.
joke, but like everything that's come with that, like I've gotten to do like the FCA devotion, and I talked at the FCA thing, the worship on the lawn a couple weeks ago,
Right.
and I definitely did not think that he would call me to talk his stuff. Like I thought I was just like a person who like did children's church or worked with kids and things. I didn't think that I would ever talk anything.
Right. And that's a great example because there's a lot of things that God will allow to come to place in our lives, and it's really just about taking the opportunity and allowing God to use us in it. And that's a good example of Him using you and you being open to just stepping out in faith. And I think, yeah, the coronavirus, if we stop and consider that, that's like the big surprise, right? That should be obvious to every single one of us, because it's altered what we consider normal life. And so just to think, when we get to verse 5, and when God says this to Habbakuk, I said last week, this makes a lot of sense in relation to our life right now. Because he says, look among the nations and see, wonder and be astounded, for I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe if I told you. And I said it last week. If I would have told you last year that, seniors aren't going to be able to graduate on a normal date, we're all going to be out of school. We won't be able to go to church and actually have, meet together for several months. Hey, like 90,000 to 100,000 people are going to pass away as a result of this virus. Like that would blow our mind. It kind of sunk in a little bit. And I mentioned this, I think, a couple weeks ago when I heard on the news. And once again, how honest are some of the reports? I don't know, but even the thought of it, they mentioned the fact that when the amount of deaths had basically passed the amount of deaths of soldiers in Vietnam. And I was just like, wow, like who would have thought that some virus would kill more people than the amount of people that died in the war? So it was very eye-opening. And like I said, if you really think about this verse, none of us would last year look at what happened this year and be like, oh yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all. And see, that's the point, that God is trying to get the attention of his people. He's trying to get the attention of his people. He's trying to get the attention of Habakkuk. And one thing I shared when we first started this study is we read the first part of this book and then we went to the last part. Okay, we call it bookends. Justin has said that several times and how to approach a book. You see devastation, you see hopelessness at the beginning, and then guess what? By the time you get to the end, you see restoration, you see hope. And this book, because of how personal it is with the prophet and God, you are able to see the change of heart of Habakkuk. Like you see his heart change. You see how he is distraught and devastated and not willing to accept what God is doing. By the end of the book, you see that he is accepting and he's, you know what, God, I'm going to trust you. I don't understand everything, but I'm with you. Such a good book for this time period, right? You stop and consider, we are in a time of uncertainty. In all seriousness, that's just the way life is. It's not just about, oh, well, we're going through the coronavirus, so life is uncertain. When all this is over and when everything seems to go back to normal, guess what? Life is still uncertain. We don't have control. So all the more that we say that the time that God has given me, and realizing that he has put me on this earth and in Bowden, Georgia, and wherever I'm at and whatever I'm doing for his purposes, and am I going to take advantage of that time that he's given me, or am I going to waste it? We know that life is short. We said that before. I preached a funeral this weekend. Just a lot of things going on in that family, a lot of drama, a lot of things where just people not getting along. And just try to convey to the family that, hey, make your decisions for Jesus. Hey, don't forget, time is short. Our life is like a vapor. We're only given this time to make decisions for Jesus. What are we going to do with it? And so, just to say all that, when we get to verse 5, we see that he's telling Habakkuk, hey, be astounded. That's a good word to remember in that. Be astounded, wonder. I'm about to do something that you're not going to believe. Same thing for our time period. And so, you already said it. Who's he sending? He's sending the Babylonians. And the rest of verse 6 all the way through 11, he's basically giving us a character trait of these Babylonians, of how he says they're like horses. Their horses are swifter than leopards. Horsemen press proudly on. Their horsemen come from afar. They come, all come for violence. And then in verse 11, then they sweep by like the wind and go on. Guilty men whose own might is their God. So he knows all about the Babylonians. They don't surprise him at all. And he's going to use them to bring judgment on his people. Now, when we get to verse 12, this is where we see Habakkuk's reaction to God's decision. And like we said, he's not happy. And it's not just about, oh, there's bad stuff going on in Jerusalem. He's not happy because of how God is choosing to bring judgment. You notice that? I mean, let's read verses 12 through 2:1, and we'll get a feel for how Habakkuk responds to this. He says, "Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have ordained them as a judgment, and you, O Rock, have established them for reproof. You who are of purer eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong. Why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? You make mankind like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. He brings all of them up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his dragnet. So he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and makes offerings to his dragnet. For by them he lives in luxury, and his food is rich. Is he then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower, and look out to see what he will say to me, and what I will answer concerning my complaint." So, verse 12, when we look at this, okay, what is he questioning? Okay, what is he questioning about God? Does anybody know? And listen to what he says. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One?
Like him being sovereign.
Okay, so his sovereignty, and then just think about this. Are you not from everlasting, my Holy One? Like, he's really questioning the very character of God. Like, why are you doing it this way, God? This doesn't make any sense. Has there ever been anything in your life that happened that didn't make sense to you? That could be every single one of us, right? I mean, if we think long enough, we could probably remember at least one thing that happened, and we're like, okay, that didn't make any sense. Why did it happen that way? Something for us to remember in our life as we move forward is that not everything is going to make sense, and that's okay. We don't have to understand everything. Some people have a hard time with that. But if you are sticking close to the Lord, if you're sticking close to his word, and you understand what Revelation says, you understand that we win in the end. Okay, it's already done. It's already over. We're just waiting for Jesus. And in the midst of that time, waiting for him, okay, we are working for his kingdom. But, you stop and consider, they're questioning his character, or Habakkuk specifically is questioning his character right here. Are you not from everlasting? Okay, aren't you sovereign? Don't you know all things? Aren't you holy? So Habakkuk is questioning his holiness in the sense of saying, hey, you're choosing this evil nation, these evil people, to bring judgment on your people. Okay, and he's saying that doesn't make any sense. And listen to this is kind of a bold statement, almost like you see the pride in Habakkuk when he says this. Look at the end of after that. He says, "So are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die." We're not going to die, God. Are you crazy? Like, we're your people. If you remember the story of Jonah, almost kind of like a similar mindset. Okay, because remember what he asked Jonah to do. Does anybody remember where he told Jonah to go?
Nineveh.
Good. See, it's all coming back to you from VeggieTales. I knew it. And we know in the story, Jonah did not go to Nineveh. Okay, he was disobedient, went the opposite direction. Okay, but nevertheless, it was all because Jonah had this mindset, right? This preconceived idea of how God was supposed to respond and how God was supposed to react to injustice. And I hope that that's what you see when you look at these different passages in Jonah or even in Habakkuk, that you understand, like, God does not work in our time frame. God does not work and do things just because it's the way we think it should be done. He's going to do it the way he wants it to be done. And to be honest, he has the big picture. So that's why when we approach it, or when something doesn't make sense to us, we shouldn't be so rash and so quick-minded to be like, God, you don't know what you're doing. But instead, be like, I'm pretty sure you know what's going on. You kind of created the universe, including me. And so you know all things. So I will trust you regardless. Habakkuk is not there yet. Okay, he doesn't get that. We shall not die. I want you to notice his pride. Okay, and so we've got to be on guard about having a prideful spirit when God decides to make a decision that doesn't make sense to us, even in the sense of like the coronavirus, right? We could quickly be like, it's not fair that all these people had to die. Maybe it's not. Okay. Nevertheless, okay, what if I was one of those people included in that? Would I make a decision to honor God regardless of whatever he decides? Because I know that I'm not a person that lives as one that has no hope. Okay, but the hope and the assurance of what Jesus has already done for me, just like I would respond like Paul. That's what I would hope for every single one of us. And we would say to live is Christ and to die is gain. I've said before, it's not going around with some kind of death wish. It's not like trying to die, but just saying, God, you have ordered my days. Help me to make each one count for you. And help me not to live in a prideful spirit, but instead the opposite, being humble-minded, accepting what you bring in my path, because every single thing he brings in my path is to help me to grow and to help me to be more like Jesus. So he said he has this prideful response to God, and then basically says, you have ordained them as judgment, and as a way of reproof. And then he even goes deeper. You who are of purer eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? So this is the background of Habakkuk's thought, is that, hey, guess what? Those Babylonians are far worse than us. So there's no reason that they should bring judgment on us, because they're worse. Okay, we can, the Bible mentions this as well. And see, maybe it's not with the issue of judgment, but we could look at those who are lost, who do not know Jesus. And sometimes we think, man, they're having it good. Like, especially if we see those that are, successful, have a lot of money, have nice cars, big houses. Everything seems to be going right for them. And we may look at that, and if we're not careful, we get this envious idea or envious approach of thinking like, that's not fair. Like, why are they being blessed, or we call it blessed, and I'm not? Well, first of all, God warns us about not being envious, okay, but also to be mindful. This is not my home anyway. Okay? My number one purpose and approach is not to try to seek after all these temporary things that have no purpose, but instead keep my eyes focused on what's above. Okay, is what the Word of God tells us. So he's got the wrong mindset, Habakkuk does. And then he goes from 15, verse 14, okay, all the way to 17, where he is comparing the Babylonians as like fishermen. And guess what? All the nations that they're going around and conquering, including Jerusalem, or including Israel and Judah, they're like just fish. And then you get to 17, he says, is he then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? So he's just questioning, but he just does not understand the way that God is working. He doesn't see the big picture. And instead of, once again, having an attitude of acceptance of what God is deciding, he's just struggling with it. I want to let you know, and I hope you understand this, it's okay to struggle with things that are going on in your life. It's okay to ask God questions. Okay, at the same time, we need to respect, okay, God, we need to eventually come to the understanding of saying, God, your will, not my will. And be okay with the thought that not everything is going to work the way that you want it to. So, and then you see his pride once again. Habakkuk in verse 1 of chapter 2, like I said before, you kind of see this pride because he's saying, I'm going to take my stand at my watch post, and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. Maybe you don't see the pride in that, but if you get the context from the very beginning of that passage all the way to verse 1, it's almost like, all right, I'm going to stand here and wait. I'm going to see what God's going to do. How's he going to answer me on this? Because, I kind of stumped God, right? Telling him, there's no way he should be able to use this corrupt, evil people to come and conquer us. Because he's a holy God. There's no way he would do that. What we should understand and what you see in this is that God will use whatever means necessary that he wants to use to bring about the purpose that he has. Guess what? He had a purpose for his people, that they would turn away from idols and turn away from sin that was going on. And he's bringing judgment in a different way that they don't expect. And to be honest, it probably gets their attention even more, right? Likewise with us. I've said it before. I don't know God's purposes totally behind the coronavirus, this whole period and that's gone on. I don't know what he's doing. I don't have the big picture, okay, but he does. And maybe it is a time period where he is trying to get our attention. We're no longer considered a Christian nation. And why is that? It's because man has pretty much decided what they want to do. Okay, and if you go back in First and Second Kings, you see over and over again where it goes from king to king, and it says, so and so reigned this time period, and they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, or they did what was right in the sight of the Lord. It characterizes each king like that at the beginning. And I stop and consider, like, what would he say about our nation? What would he say about us? What would he say about his church, the people that are believers? Are we truly surrendered to Jesus? Are we truly living our lives for him? Are we truly keeping him the priority of our life? Or is it, well, let me just kind of fit God in when I can. Let me fit Jesus in. Make him fit in my schedule. Make him fit in my life. Let me set my purposes and my plan, and then maybe God will like meet up with that. And each one of us know that's not how God works. It was never meant to be like that. And so I start to consider that maybe God is trying to get our attention, to turn our eyes back to him, as realizing he's all we have. Okay, when it's all said and done, he's all we have. I don't think it's a mistake that we see so many things that have been like stripped away from our normal life. Okay, whether it was sports, whether it was school, whether it was entertainment, okay, different things just stripped away, to where we come to a point of saying, well, am I a real believer? Am I a real follower of Jesus? How much more passion am I going to have when this time is over for Jesus and doing his will? Like, will I finally recognize the fact that I have neighbors that need Jesus, and that I can be an instrument by God to reach them? Getting out of my house, going next door, taking advantage of the opportunities that we have, and not allowing the time to just fly by and miss the opportunities. The very beginning of chapter 2, like I said, it doesn't fall in line with the structure, but when you get to verse 2, okay, so chapter 2, verse 2, this is where we see God responding to Habakkuk. Okay, he says, "And the Lord answered me, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so he may run who reads it. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end, it will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come, it will not delay." So God responds, but he's not like responding to Habakkuk saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, Habakkuk. I'm sorry you don't see what I'm doing. I'll change my mind, Habakkuk." No, he's like, he doesn't even answer him in a way of being like, "Well, you know what? I hope that you understand while I'm using the Babylonians. I know they're evil people." No, he just goes right into, "Hey, guess what, Habakkuk? That's what's going to happen. In fact, you need to write it down. Okay, write it down." And then why write it down? So that it can be spread throughout the nation. Have you ever heard that phrase used in relation to something that is going to take place? Somebody saying, "Hey, you can write that down," or you can note that, okay, or take note of that. And it's just this understanding of God trying to get across to Habakkuk, this is going to happen, whether you like it, whether you understand it. This is what's going to happen. So, what does he say? Okay, the vision is for an appointed time. Okay, so guess what? It's in my timing, Habakkuk, not yours. Okay, it's not going to lie, meaning it's going to take place, Habakkuk, so get ready. He says, if it seems slow, wait for it. That's a great thing for us to understand in the sense of God working, okay, is to understand that we have to be patient. We're not patient by nature. Things happen in our life and we get frustrated, even daily. Sometimes we get frustrated with things that happen. And God is saying, are you going to remain patient? Things go wrong. Are you going to remain patient? You're praying for someone, okay, to get saved, or you're praying for something to happen in your life, and everything seems to be going wrong. And God says, are you going to remain patient? His nature is patience. Okay, his nature is part of his nature to be patient. Think about us. Like, he's patient with us every single day. He's patient in the fact that we are sinful. He continues to forgive. Okay, he's patient with the whole world in the sense of saying, hey, I'm wanting that none should perish, but that all should come to repentance. So that person I need to tell about Jesus, he's still patient. He's waiting. Okay, that's the reason he hasn't come back yet, because he's waiting for your friend to get saved. He's waiting for your relative to get saved. He's waiting for everyone to get saved. Okay, but he's going to come back. Okay, so we get to verse 4. And you know, this verse, I'm not totally sure. Okay, maybe Justin, since you're on here, maybe you can give some insight in this. Listen to what it says in verse 4. Behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him, but the righteous shall live by faith, by his faith. Now, what I mean is the first part of that verse, it really sounds like to me like God is speaking about Habakkuk. Now, he could also be speaking about the Babylonians. And so maybe he is. But in this specific time, when you think how he's responding to Habakkuk, I mean, it does seem like Habakkuk is puffed up, like he's full of pride. Like he doesn't think, well, God, this isn't the way it's supposed to happen. And maybe as a reminder to Habakkuk, hey, do you remember? The righteous shall live by faith. Okay? So you're going to live by faith. And I have a couple verses to refer to that. Justin, do you have any way or interpretation as far as that verse, which way you would think it should go?
Yeah, I think you're right that because of Habakkuk's arrogance in coming before God and with his expectation and cheating a little bit and knowing how the book ends, I think you're wise to say that he's speaking to the prophet, and then you can affirm that in the next part of that verse where he says the righteous. So in contrast to the arrogant, the puffed up, you got the righteous. So I think you're right on target on that one.
Okay. And so it's kind of funny in the sense of thinking like God is calling him out. Okay. Hey, you're arrogant, you're prideful, and thinking that you could respond to me or think that somehow I'm going to fit into your scheme of how things are done, Habakkuk. But instead, okay, the righteous shall live by faith. Now, this phrase, and in fact, that part of that verse is like the central theme of this book. Okay, the righteous shall live by faith. I want you to think, what do you think that means? Who can respond and give me an idea of when I say the righteous shall live by faith, what does that mean?
Relying completely on God and not needing to see things to believe it.
Okay. Anybody else?
I think doing things, whether or not if you're scared of the outcome, you still do it because it's what God's calling you to do, and that's faith. So like no matter the outcome or no matter what you think the outcome's going to be, doing it anyways, if God's calling you to do it.
All right. And stop and think about, what do you think righteousness is?
Doing what is right in God's eyes.
All right. So yeah, doing what is right based on his word. Okay. Living in a way that honors him. Okay. So righteousness. And it says shall live by his faith, or live by faith. So stop and consider this. Are you righteous in and of yourself? No. Carly's nodding, right? Okay, we're not righteous in and of ourselves, right? Okay, what makes us righteous?
God. sorry. God.
Okay, and how specifically? Is he just like, boom, you righteous now?
No, he kind of I guess what he does is he works through you, and he like if God's calling you to start a devotion, that's how he starts it. He makes you right by working through you and calling you to do all these different things.
All right. Now, just get this. If he's just like, I'm leading you to do a devotion, be careful, because we know that our works, okay, no amount of things that we could do, if they classify as good, okay, they're never going to measure up to his perfection. And he knew that. So who did he send? Sunday school answer is?
Jesus.
Yeah. Okay. So what did Jesus do for us?
Die for us on the cross.
Jesus dying on the cross, okay, him shedding his blood, him rising from the dead, okay, that justifies us. It makes us right before God. And so guess what? We are declared righteous because of what Jesus did, not because of anything that we did or that we could do. Okay, it's only through his grace, as we know in Ephesians chapter 2, right? It's only by faith, okay, and it's only by his grace, okay, that we're saved. So if you stop and consider what he's saying to Habakkuk right here, okay, the righteous shall live by faith. Okay, you're going to see how this connects well with the New Testament. Specifically, I already said you can see it connected with Ephesians 2, Galatians 3:11, Romans 1:16 through 17, Hebrews 10:31. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time going through those verses, but I just wanted to call out some of those references to help you see. In fact, search. You could go and search, put in, like Bible Gateway or in the Bible app. Okay, go and search righteous live by faith, or that statement, and you'll see how it's echoed in the New Testament. And so it's something for us. It's a key theme for us to remember as we come across it in this book, because it's showing us how we're supposed to live. Okay, that he's calling Habakkuk at this point, hey, stop being full of pride. Okay, the righteous are going to live by faith. You're living based on what I'm going to do for you, Habakkuk, and you can't change the circumstances. Just live by faith. Trust me. So we know in our life, as I've already said, there's circumstances that occur. We have no control. And the question is, are you still going to live righteously and live by faith? Then he transitions, right? He gets to verse 5, and he starts to kind of transition to the Babylonians. He says, moreover, wine is a traitor, an arrogant man who is never at rest. His greed is as wide as Sheol. Like death, he has never enough. He gathers for himself all nations and collects as his own all peoples. So kind of a thing for, he could be talking to Habakkuk still in the sense of relating it to him. Like, be careful, because guess what? Your pride could lead to the same place to where the Babylonians are. Like, why do you think you're so much better than the Babylonians, Habakkuk? Okay, because your pride could result in the same arrogance, could result in the same amount of evil. So don't ever get to the point of thinking like, oh, well, I'm better than that person. Or, hey, this sin is not as bad as that sin. And we tend to do that sometimes, right? And that's because in our world, sins have been characterized. Like, sins have been put in levels. Like, oh, it's a murder. Okay, that's bad. But then we say lying. Oh, well, that's not that bad. But we stop and consider sin as sin, and God says it's all sin. And guess what? It all separates you from God. When we get to this point in verse 5, I think he's speaking to Habakkuk still. And he's also trying to show Habakkuk this connection with saying, hey, you could be just like the Babylonians. Okay, your pride could lead to greed, of thinking that somehow you're better. And then we get to verse 6. And verse 6 through 20 is where God states these woes. Okay, woes are almost like curses. These are the things that the Babylonians are doing that are reasons why he's going to bring judgment on them too. So catch this. Yeah, he's bringing judgment on his own people, and he's using the Babylonians to do it. But guess what? That doesn't mean the Babylonians are getting away with anything. Okay, he's going to bring judgment on them as well. And then he goes through and he states what are the different things that are judgment issues for them. He calls them woes. In verse 6, he says, shall not all these take up their taunt against him with scoffing and riddles for him to say? So he's saying, hey, you're not getting away with anything, Babylonians, because, hey, all the people that you have acted wickedly against, all the things that you are doing in your own nation, all the ways that you have taken advantage of all these different people, it's going to come back to you. He says, woe to him. This is the first woe. So I want you to see there's going to be 5. Okay, there's 5. Woe to him who heaps up what is not his own. For how long? And loads himself with pledges. Will not your debtors suddenly arise, and those awake who will make you tremble? Then you will be a spoil for them, because you have plundered many nations. All the remnant of the peoples shall plunder you. For the blood of man and violence to the earth, to cities and all who dwell in them. So this is the first woe, and basically the first woe, you're going to see the second one is very similar to the first. Okay, but the first woe is stating, hey, all the stuff that you did to those other people, guess what? It's coming back to you. Listen to the second woe. Verse 9, he says, woe to them who gets evil gain for his house, to set his nest on high, to be safe from the reach of harm. You have devised shame for your house. By cutting off many peoples, you have forfeited your life. For the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the woodwork respond. So same kind of idea. Okay, the way that you have manipulated and taken advantage of other people and stolen their things, guess what? It's coming back to you. Okay, that evil that you poured out on others, that evil is going to be poured out on you. Many of you have heard, those that live by the sword will die by the sword. Okay, and that's going to be true. You know, we could look at all these different empires in history, Babylonians as number 1. Okay, and guess what? Do we hear anything about the Babylonians anymore? No, they're done with, right? Fast forward. Okay, you've got Nazi Germany. You've got Hitler. Okay, what did he live by? He lived by the sword. He was about conquering everything, taking over everybody. Do we hear about Hitler anymore? I mean, in history, yeah, but he's not around. And neither is his empire. We stop and get fast. You could go to all these different, empires, right? The Roman Empire, how big and glorious and grand, and how much power they had, and how far their influence stretched in different nations and all the places that they took over. Do you hear of the Roman Empire anymore? So God, he makes it known that he's going to make these nations pay for what they do. He's not going to allow them to get away with their evil. Then we get to the third woe. Okay, look at verse 12. He says, woe to him who builds a town with blood and founds a city on iniquity. Behold, it is not from the Lord of hosts that peoples labor merely for fire, and nations weary themselves for nothing. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge and the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. So this is a woe. He's saying, take advantage of people specifically. Like they build a city based on the blood of others. You stop and think about that. This is like slavery. Okay? So the third woe is those nations that are taking advantage, specifically, he's talking about the Babylonians, taking advantage of other nations by using their people as slaves. And then the fourth woe, verse 15, woe to him who makes his neighbors drink. You pour out your wrath and make them drunk, in order to gaze at their nakedness. You will have your fill of shame instead of glory. Drink yourself and show your uncircumcision. The cup in the Lord's right hand will come around to you, and utter shame will come upon your glory. The violence done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, as will the destruction of the beasts that terrified them. For the blood of man and the violence of, to the earth, to the cities and all who dwell in them. So this fourth woe, okay, is a woe of how irresponsible leaders have been leading, and he gives the example of alcohol. He gives the example of like prostitution and all these different things. Okay, in this passage, okay, in this fourth woe, he's saying these are the representatives of these nations, specifically the Babylonians. He's saying there's been irresponsible leaders who are leading their people to do evil things. And you see that even in the last woe. So the fifth woe begins in verse 18. He says, "What profit is an idol when its maker has shaped it? A metal image, a teacher of lies. For its maker trusts in his own creation. When he makes speechless idols, woe to him who says to a wooden thing, awake, to a silent stone, arise. Can this teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath in it at all. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him." Love how he ends in verse 20, but you see in 18 and 19 this last woe, and this is the woe of idolatry. Okay, we know in a lot of these nations, specifically the Babylonians, that their gods were man-made, things of stone, things of wood. And I love how he responds to this. He's like, how pointless are these things? Like they can't do anything. Okay, how pointless it is to say arise. Okay, how pointless it is to say, because that's what they were doing. They were trusting in these idols, whether it be for agriculture, fertility, all these different ways they were trusting in these idols. And he's saying they can't do anything. Okay, so he's giving a woe. And once again, this is what you want to see. And it really expresses this good in the video, is that it says, you know what, this is not unique just to the Babylonians, these different woes that we hear. That's why I stated when we look at history, we can see how the Roman Empire is gone. Okay, and you go through the list of all these oppressive empires, and they're not here anymore. Why? Because they've been dealt with. God has brought judgment on them. And what I want to see, and what we need to see, is when we look at these five woes, when we look at the characteristics of the judgment that God is bringing on the Babylonians, do we see that in this country? Okay, do we see these characteristics in America? Let's stop and consider this again. Do we have unjust economics in this country?
Drugs.
Okay, drugs. Okay, anything else?
Gambling.
Gambling. That's a good example, right? The third woe was slave labor. You're like, I don't see anybody being slaves. Okay, do we know that there's slavery going on in this country right now? Okay, if you didn't know this, okay, and you probably do, you probably just didn't realize it or remember it, that there is sex trade going on, okay, where women are being used in ways that they shouldn't, and even being taken at a young age, some killed, okay, some having to live as slaves. There's still slavery going on in this nation. Okay, the fourth woe, irresponsible leaders. We should know that Washington is definitely not perfect. Politicians are not perfect. If you haven't seen that even during the last couple of years, right? Like all this stuff going on as a result in connection with the coronavirus. Like you still see how Republicans and Democrats just go back and forth, right? Whatever they have to say, okay, to get the vote. Okay, whatever they have to do to make the other side or other person look bad. Instead of putting away all that stuff so that, hey, we can get back to work, or we can get this nation back to where it needs to be. Even when they passed, if you didn't know this, they sent out it's called a stimulus package, okay, sending out money to the people of the nation. And they were taking all this time to an agreement of what to do. In the midst of that, many people are losing their jobs, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of it was just because the Democrats didn't like what the Republicans were saying and all this kind of stuff. So there's obviously irresponsible leaders in this country. The last one, idolatry. Would you say that there's idolatry in our country? And in what ways? Because obviously I don't see anybody building stones or wood figurines. So what are our examples of idolatry for our nation?
Technology.
I think money
Putting-
and some like celebrities and things.
Right.
Popularity.
Just
Good.
putting material things as the number one priority.
Okay.
Or like oneself.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there are so many different things we need to realize are idols, and that we're cautious not to allow those to become idols in our life, especially as a believer. Um, you know, all those different things that y'all said are idols. And the reality is this, is that we get to the point of looking at something as an idol that takes the place of God in our life. So we go back to the 10 Commandments and we know that God is a jealous God. Okay. He says there will be no other gods before me. Okay. Or but me. So we stop and we say, man, these 5 woes that I see that are brought down on the Babylonians, okay, do they represent our nation right now? And maybe God is bringing judgment on our nation. And guess what? It's the same kind of things that we're seeing in Habakkuk take place right now. That he's bringing judgment because of our unjust economics, because of our corruptness or corruption within our government or whatever it may be. That he's bringing judgment because of slavery still occurring. Maybe he's bringing judgment because of racial divides. Maybe he's bringing judgment because of the irresponsible leadership or idolatry. Those are just some of the woes, right? But nevertheless, we need to be careful that we don't look at what we see in the word right here as just referring to Babylonians, because, hey, it's going to be several nations that God brings judgment on because of the same things that they're doing. So we're going to close chapter 2, and we'll close our time together with what he says in verse 20, because this is what it's all about. Okay, he's trying to get this across once again to Habakkuk that, hey, you're not going to understand everything. And guess what? You may be full of pride, and guess what? I'm going to have to humble you. That's the hard part, and that's where we need to get to a point of understanding why it makes so much more sense to just live humbly and to respond to God in a humble way instead of thinking that we've got to do it our way. He says in verse 20, but the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. He's like, you say what you want, but guess what? I'm God. The reason I say I like this verse is because it reminds me once again that we serve a powerful God. Okay, we serve a God that's in control. And why does that matter so much? Well, I would so much more serve and worship a God who is in control, serve and worship a God that is all powerful, that nothing is too hard for him, than to serve and worship a God that is not in control, that can be taken away, his authority can be taken away. When we get to verse 20, he's trying to get Habakkuk to the point of humbling him and reminding him that he's God and he's not. Habakkuk's not. And so as we get to verse 20, yes, the woes are the judgment is still coming. Okay, he can't stop the judgment. Likewise in our own life. Okay, we can't stop what God is planning and purposing for our nation or even for our life. That we respond like he says, the righteous shall live by his faith. So live by faith. Okay, respond in righteousness, meaning be obedient to God no matter what. And guess what? When we're obedient to God no matter what, we show that we have faith, because we can't control anything. And so when things aren't going our way and we still choose to be righteous, we still choose righteousness, and we still choose to live by faith, okay, God sees that we're living for him, okay, that we're choosing to obey him.